Teisha Bader, and in the news, an anti-Semitic attack in Germany and the outpouring of solidarity that followed it. We reported to you last week of a young Israeli Arab who was assaulted when he wore a kippah walking down the street in a Berlin neighborhood. In response, yesterday, some 2,000 Germans of all faiths proudly wore kippahs and marched in Berlin, as well as in several other German cities, to show their support of the Jewish community. Diedre Berger is the director of the American Jewish Committee's office in Berlin. She joins us now from the city to give us a sense of what happened yesterday at the Kippa marches and what the state of anti-Semitism is in Germany today. Diedre, thank you so much for joining us here on JBS.
I'm happy to be with you.
So let's start with the assault that happened last week. I don't know if you know more than we do, but we reported that a young man who turned out to be actually an Israeli Arab was with his friend who was Jewish, and this friend had apparently told him of the dangers of walking with a kippah down the street, and so he wore a kippah to see if that was in fact true. Does this resonate with what you know of what happened?
Yes, I think it was other Israeli Jewish friends of his who told him. I'm not sure that the person with him was Jewish, but it doesn't matter. The point was this was a young man wearing a kippah, and he didn't get very far, so to speak, before being confronted by a group of three young men who turned out to be new immigrants from Syria, and one of them became extremely aggressive and started yelling, Yehudi, Yehudi, Jew, Jew, and taking a belt and lashing him with it. And the imagery of that, I think, is particularly notable because in the Arab world, there's certain significance to that sort of punishment, in a way. It resonated a lot. The young man is celebrated as a hero in social media, which is, in addition to the disgrace of this incident, is very, very upsetting. And I think that to our benefit, this young man had the strength and the quick-wittedness to film what was happening. And he made something visible that we know does happen with some regularity, but we don't see it. And because we have internet and it went viral, it immediately created a level of attention that we have not really seen to this degree before.
It's true, and really, I have to say, I was so moved and really impressed by how quickly the response and this march came together, and I want to ask you about that in a minute. German leaders quickly condemned the incident, including German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and very quickly, as I said, it seems this Kippa March was organized in a number of cities, and even though the incident was terrible, as you and I know, these things happen all the time in many places around the world, and we don't see this kind of response. We don't see thousands of people walking in the street showing their support after this happened. So first of all, were you at the march yesterday?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so can you, first of all, who organized it? How did it come together so quickly?
The Jewish community of Berlin organized it. There were some comments by some of the speakers that we will really be a step further when it doesn't need the Jewish community to organize a protest against anti-Semitism. But in any case, it did come together very quickly. I think also due to the media reports that heightened attention. The chancellor spoke out almost immediately, as did the foreign minister. So it was very high profile. And it didn't take long for the list of speakers to go beyond the head of Germany's Jewish community and the Berlin community and the mayor of Berlin. Those are the three original speakers. And within 2 days, they suddenly had a very long list of speakers, including some important members of parliament and other city officials. And suddenly everyone was crowded up on the stage and couldn't wait to speak. It was really very moving to be part of a crowd of several thousand people, all wearing kippahs, in the heart of Berlin in Europe. Not just anywhere in Europe, but of course there's always an additional feeling about being in Berlin, standing next to a Jewish community center, and seeing people who have the courage to put on a kippah and express solidarity. As one reporter mentioned, as soon as people left, they immediately took it off, although that's not so unusual. I mean, unless you're very religious, people don't always walk around wearing kippahs. But people mentioned to me it was the first time they'd ever done that. Was it safe? They felt a little insecure. It's something new, and I think that it awakened consciousness to a completely new degree. The only thing that I thought was of concern, also others, that in a way this was a helpful incident in terms of raising awareness, as much as we, of course, sympathize and hope that the victim recovers from what had happened. And still, we thought, what if he had been recognized for speaking Hebrew, and not because he was wearing a yarmulke, because he is, after all, an Israeli, and he'd been assaulted for that reason? I'm not sure we would have had this outpouring of public attention. I think we would have heard a lot of, well, it's a fight between two different ethnic groups, and we don't want to get involved. Although, of course, somebody walking down the streets of Berlin has nothing to do with a conflict in a country thousands of kilometers away. So I think there was still a pall a little bit over this march. And also, we were wondering, where were all these people 4 years ago when there were daily marches on the streets of Berlin and cities throughout Europe to protest the war in Gaza? And every single march and demonstration was not just criticism of Israel, but there was anti-Semitism galore, unfortunately. And people were afraid to come out, and there wasn't a very loud protest. So we've made progress, but there's still a very long way to go.
Yeah, you make some very interesting points about whether it would have been the same if he was attacked because he was Israeli. And also an interesting point you made that did not occur to me until you said it was people at the rally showing their support, showing their solidarity. We saw pictures of women wearing hijabs, putting the kippah over the hijab, which I thought was really moving. But your point of that also giving those people a slight awareness of what it must be like to wear a symbol that tells everyone else, I'm Jewish. And I think that's a really interesting point, even if they just had that awareness for a few minutes, and then you said took off the kippah at the end of the rally. It's an interesting, perhaps, side effect of the Kippa March.
Yeah, I think that it's the beginning of some consciousness raising, in a sense, at least of the awareness that Jewish leaders in Germany are not exaggerating when they warn the communities to be cautious when wearing a yarmulke. And over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of outrage expressed, a lot of attacks on the Jewish community leaders saying that they're exaggerating the problem and that they're doing it because they want to put Muslims in particular in a bad light. And I think for the first time there was recognition, I had the feeling at this rally yesterday, that there is unfortunately, sadly, some truth to it, and that almost no one feels entirely comfortable walking in the streets of Berlin wearing the yarmulke. The chances are, of course, that nothing will happen. There's an Orthodox Jewish community in Prenzlauer Berg, the district where this happened, and one of the members remarked to me a few days ago, she said, I've been living here for 18 years, and, you know, we're clearly visible from the way we dress because we're more Orthodox, more conservative, particularly the men with hats. And she said, in 18 years, we've never had an incident like that. Not in that part of the city. They have had incidents in parts of the city where there's a high number of immigrants and a high number of Muslims. And there have been repeated attacks on members of the Orthodox community. So they do know that it's not so safe. But I think an attack happening in the middle of a very hip, middle-class professionals neighborhood where no one expected it was the factor that the aha effect. Oh, this is really a problem. Now it's happening to us here. So I think an incident that was unfortunate, we hope wouldn't have happened, but had the positive effect of finally shaking people up and making them aware of what's going on.
And when Chancellor Merkel condemned the assault last week, she said the fight against anti-Semitism must be won as our country's good name is at stake. Do you take that as relating to this? Obviously, this happened in Germany. There's a whole nother level of, the debt that Germany feels to the Jewish people because of the Holocaust. So is the response to this incident, do you think, even more important and perhaps more scrutinized because of with that background?
Well, yes, I think Germany always feels as if it's more scrutinized. On the right wing, there's some who say it's time to stop that, and we're tired of being singled out, and we long ago made amends, and we want to be normal like others. But I think the vast majority of those in the public arena of opinion leaders in Germany understand that they're still under scrutiny and don't feel that it's wrong. I mean, I think they acknowledge that Germany has an indefinite, perpetual responsibility to its Jewish community. And one of the speakers at yesterday's rally to protest anti-Semitism said quite forcefully that we're very fortunate to have now the seeds of Jewish life. They're just starting to sprout. They're still in an early stage, and we really can't feel at all comfortable until they grow into very strong trees here in Germany. It was a very vivid metaphor, and gave the sense of the fragility of Jewish life, that there still is, and yet the understanding in Germany that there is a commitment, and the commitment is to rebuild a strong Jewish life. It will never, ever be able to replace what was lost, the enormity of what was lost. And I think caring people do understand that.
Now, Diedre, what do you say to people who say to you, oh, I would never live in Germany as a Jew. How can you stay in Germany? Or why would you choose to live there or not leave there because of the atrocities of the Holocaust? How do you answer that from your own personal experience?
It's interesting that you ask that. I do get this question a lot, as do all of us who live in Germany, especially Americans, when we go back and I speak to Jewish friends, family, I go into synagogues, Jewish audiences, and I say, I can understand you're feeling that. It's a personal decision. I think that you will find that if you come to visit Germany today, you'll see that there have been major changes in society that are quite astonishing, in fact, in a relatively short space of time in the course of history. In the past 70 years, that an extremely strong democracy has taken root in Germany, and it changes people's minds. And I think the most astonishing thing for us, the American Jewish Committee has for the last 38 years had an active exchange program with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is linked to Chancellor Merkel's party. Also, we work with other foundations who are nonpartisan, but this particular exchange program is still going strong. And I see every year when our lay leaders come to visit Berlin, and many are apprehensive. Many have had big, major discussions in their families. Should I participate on this trip or not, to spend a week learning about modern Germany? And I always say, of course I understand. How can we not understand apprehensions, especially when you don't know anything about modern Germany? And I would say that by the second day, people are already starting to think differently, and by the third day, they're relaxing, and by the end of the week, many don't really want to get on the plane to go back home because they're so astonished at what for them is unexpected and how much has been done in Germany to confront the past, to fight anti-Semitism. And I think the understanding that, of course, there is still anti-Semitism. It has not vanished. The numbers have gone down vastly from the end of World War II. If we're talking about 15 or 20% latent anti-Semitism, which academics do now, that's a big step forward from 60 to 70%, that the numbers that were recorded after World War II. So there's been enormous progress. There's still a problem. It's flaring up in certain quarters even more today on the far right, the far left, in some parts of the Muslim population, and some old-fashioned stereotypes everywhere. And nonetheless, there's also a strong stance that's taken in many German cities and in public life, in parliaments, some stronger than others, and there's a very strong civil society, and that's what I say. That's the important thing. It's not that there's still anti-Semitism in Germany. It's that we have so many partners to fight against it, and that's unique in Europe today, I must say.
Absolutely.
It's an amazing experience, and I think people who come here and try and learn more about the German Jewish experience today are quite overwhelmed.
Interesting. I also want to ask you about those comments that were made. There was some controversy about comments made by some Jewish leaders and other Jewish leaders getting back to the incident that happened and the Kippa March. Joseph Schuster, who leads the Central Council of Jews in Germany, warned Jews not to wear a kippah and to sort of keep a low profile. And then others in the Jewish community were upset, including the head of the European Jewish Association, Rabbi Menachem Margolin, said that is not the right approach. Not wearing a kippah is, in fact, what the anti-Semites in Europe want. And so if you do that, you're kind of fulfilling their vision. How does that controversy play out in this?
I think they're both right. And I think we need to see the context of who's saying what and where. If you're the head of a Jewish community in a major country in Europe, where you just had an incident, your community members are concerned. I mean, what he didn't say to never wear a kippah in public, but he said you need to be cautious, and there's some areas of the city where I would urge caution. It was a much more nuanced statement, and at the rally yesterday he repeated that to make sure that he was understood. But he also said that he thought it was impressive and moving that so many people were showing solidarity by wearing yarmulkes. He said that's where we want to go. We're not there yet. And Rabbi Margolis is also right in saying we don't want to hide ourselves. We don't want to hide our identity. But that doesn't mean that that's where Europe is at the moment. And in many cities, there is some latent aggression, different aggressions, and under the surface, people don't feel comfortable. I mean, you simply can't make any blanket statements that anywhere in Europe or in Germany that you can just walk wearing a yarmulke and not run the risk of being accosted. You generally can in Germany of walking freely, wearing Jewish symbols, wearing headscarves for Muslim women, but there is a residual danger. There's still a lot of racism, anti-Semitism, and I really think that as Americans, we have to look at our own society as well and see how open it is. And social media has certainly played a role in this new levels of incitement. There's no answer, but I think it's important not to give in, to be judicious, not be foolhardy, but certainly be proud of your identity and be proud of being Jewish and live an open life as Jews. Otherwise, the communities will shrink and disappear in Europe. And then it is, in a way, an ultimate victory for the Nazis.
Now, Diedre, I know you've led the office there in Berlin for almost 18 years. So have you felt a rise or a surge in anti-Semitism, or how do you kind of gauge the feeling right now as far as what you've experienced yourself and any impact on the community there that you hear about?
I think that the expressions of anti-Semitism have become more open. It's very difficult to measure. It's very underreported. There's disputes about what's anti-Semitism, where do people cross boundaries. But I do have the feeling that there's more open expressions of it. We're seeing things on internet, things that get passed around Facebook that we didn't see in these numbers before. I don't know that people are more anti-Semitic than they were before, but I think they feel very emboldened to express it. The resurgence of populist nationalist movements in Europe, and which is not new, by the way. I mean, it's been going on for 30 years or more. Particularly think of France and Austria, where these parties, unfortunately, now have quite a history. They have lowered the barriers, and they've helped break taboos that, in a positive way, were there. And not all taboos are bad. And I fear that once, it's like Pandora's box, once it's been opened, people feel entitled to express anti-Semitic sentiments. I think that's a difference today. I don't feel a threat generally of physical violence. I don't seek out situations, but it's less a threat of feeling personally endangered than knowing that people say things they didn't used to say. One other encouraging development this week in Germany is that last week there was a music award given to two rappers whose lyrics have for a long time been controversial, and not just for the album that they got the award for this time. But these are rappers who are known to have conspiratorial views of the world, and that there's undertones of anti-Semitism in some of the songs that they've written. And this particular album that got the equivalent of the Grammy Awards, it's called the Echo Awards, had some disturbing sentences, allusions to the Holocaust that were extremely deprecating and disturbing. And the interesting thing is that, as we know, this is not a new problem in rap music or some other forms of music, and especially battle rap, where the musicians try and outdo themselves in how brutal, violent, racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic they can be. But for the first time, other musicians stood up and said, stop, this has gone too far. And a famous German punk musician named Campino, at the ceremony, condemned and really criticized the winning artists.
Wow, I didn't know that. We did report about this last week, and we reported about Daniel Barenboim returning his award in protest.
Yes, exactly. And the interesting thing now is that the music industry announced yesterday that they're abolishing this award.
Yes.
It's over. I mean, they said they understand it's too tainted to move forward with this. They cannot give an award in the future that will forever be associated with being given to anti-Semitic musicians.
And again, I feel like that story, and I'm so glad you brought it up, is another example. Again, it's perhaps the silver lining. There was this assault. Days later, there was this huge march of solidarity. There was this award presented to a rap group with anti-Semitic lyrics and other offensive lyrics. Days later, artists stood up, or at the ceremony, as you just mentioned, artists stood up and said no, and now the award has been canceled. So it seems that Germany responds very quickly, very firmly, and visibly to such anti-Semitic incidents. So that is encouraging.
It is certainly encouraging. That said, there's still a lot that needs to be done to combat anti-Semitic stereotypes. We're seeing it at schools. Last year, our AJC Berlin office commissioned a report on the problem of Salafism, which is an ultra-conservative form of Islam, and anti-Semitism at schools. And there were interviews, in-depth interviews with 27 teachers, and many of them, over a third, reported growing religiosity in their students amongst the pupils. And they said the problem is that this is really a challenge for instilling democratic values, because these are students who say their religious principles and values are put at a higher level than what the teachers say in trying to transmit civic education. They're homophobic, they're sexist, they're anti-Semitic, some of these students. It's certainly not every Muslim student, and Muslim students are the main victims of this sort of terror, in a way, this religious terror. And mobbing, but there was an incident just 3 weeks before where it was reported at an elementary school where a young student was put under pressure and even death threats because she didn't believe in Allah. And when it turned out a number of times, and then it turned out later that she was Jewish, and then she was really attacked and insulted and threatened with death. And I think there's a feeling that it's gone too far, and we haven't really taken enough notice of it, and we don't always know how to deal with it. But we have to say, stop. Yes, there's a problem of intolerance, of religious intolerance. Anti-Semitism is part of it, and it's not just the right wing. We also need to look at what Chancellor Merkel said, or some of these new forms of anti-Semitism.
Well, thank you so much, Diedre. I mean, it really is, it's so special for us to hear from somebody who not only is in Berlin, was at the march yesterday, has been part of the Jewish community in Germany for such a long time, and really can give us such a personal perspective and balanced perspective on the situation there in Berlin, in Germany, and for the Jewish community. And we thank you so much for giving us of your time on JBS today.
Thank you. You're so welcome, and thanks for your interest, because in the end, the most important thing for the Jewish community in Germany is to feel supported, not just by politicians in Germany, but by the Jewish community around the world. So thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you. And we appreciate your time once again. Best wishes. Diedre Berger is the director of the American Jewish Committee's office in Berlin, and we thank her kindly for taking the time to share her experience and her expertise with us. And thank you, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS Associate Director, Dara Golub, and to our editors, John McDevitt, Jesse Flores, and Liam Ahern. I'm Teisha Bader with this edition of In the News.